Okay then, I shall now wish to hand over to our first session today, Animal Welfare, the Human Element, kindly sponsored by Pets at Home. I'm delighted that this session is going to be led by members of the Human Behaviour Change for Life. The aim for today is we will all leave equipped with new skills and knowledge about human behavioural change and feel empowered to put it into practice. It is a multifaceted subject and can be achieved in a myriad of ways. Our speakers will consider its many forms when it comes to influencing animal welfare issues and will present several case studies, both here and abroad. The whole topic is something that we have been working with the BVA on. So let me introduce the speakers. First of all is Jo White, who's the co-founder. She has a passion for animals and a fascination for what makes the human animal tick. Prior to founding the initial Human Behaviour Change for Animals, CIC, she has a background in animal welfare and was working as a consultant. Together with Suzanne Rogers, she established the company after recognising that insight about how and why people behave the way they do could indeed provide solutions to challenging issues that affect animals. In 2022, they set up the HBCL to reflect the expanding scope of their work to include areas such as the environment, conversation and well-being. And she's joined by Sophie Lewis, an experienced project manager in the fields of human behaviour change, animal welfare, conservation, responsible tourism and more. She's adept at supporting the growth of organisations and individuals and is motivated by a passion for empowering people to protect human communities, non-human animals and the planet. So, can I hand over to you, please?
Thank you very much. Just want to start by just checking that everyone can hear me okay. Just maybe nod if you can hear. Thank you very much for that. So my name's Jo White, and as Julian's kindly introduced, I'm doing a co-session with Sophie Lewis. We're going to be talking about animal welfare, the human element, and we just wanted to start with a reflection. And I think hearing the history of the Animal Welfare Foundation is a really good setting, both from a point of view of reflecting on why we're all here, but also thinking, I took a look at the delegate list and the other speakers who are here today, and what's really came out to me is that we've got a room full of people who have that shared common care of animal welfare that want to make a difference. So we've got a situation where we're sharing a value here. We will come back to the importance of looking at shared values, but one of the things we wanted to do to start off with was to pose a couple of questions. So the questions we have for you are, what's your objective? What's your objective for attending today? What are you hoping to achieve through being here? What actions will you take from being part of today? Because today offers an enormous opportunity. It could be a catalyst for change. It could be a catalyst for taking more action. And when we take more action, it involves new behaviours. So we're going to be talking about how we can harness the sort of opportunities for change and how we do that. We also want you to just take a moment to consider a number of points. The world is ever-changing, society is ever-changing, and as a result of that, we have a situation where animal welfare is also changing, so the issues that animals face are evolving. We, the human, are both the problem and the solution. If we look at many of the animal welfare issues that we're facing, it's the human that is the common denominator. So from a perspective, we're the problem, but we can also offer the solutions to these problems. The other element just to consider is that behaviour and change are something that is inevitable. Change is happening all the time. You only have to think about the fact that we're sitting in this room, and in the time that we're in this room, we're all have aged a little bit. So change is something that is inevitable. We can't get away from it. And that can be good or bad, but it's an opportunity to embrace, an opportunity for looking at how we can take approaches that will effectively deliver change in the way that takes us forwards and positively impacts upon animal welfare. So in today's session, we're going to cover a number of different elements. So we're going to look at providing you with an outline of human behaviour change. We're aware there's a mixed audience in the sense of some of you are already using behavioural science in your work. Some of you are part of it. There's a few members of our wider team at Human Behaviour Change for Life here. But also for some, it may be a new area that you want to explore. So we're just going to provide a bit of an introduction. We're also going to introduce our Human Behaviour Change for Life framework, the model that we use for undertaking projects. So we're very much about using the science in practice. So this is where we utilise an approach of understand, change and impact. Today's session is going to be about providing some top tips, some tools, giving you that kind of, hopefully we're whetting your appetite for wanting to know more. But also, it's going to be a bit of an active session, so we do want some participation, and we'd be really, really pleased if you got involved a little bit. I also just wanted to say thank you to those people who completed. We had a little survey just to kind of get an idea of the sorts of things that people wanted to get out of our session. So thank you very much for completing that. And it gave us some insights into where people were. So there's obviously some, as I mentioned, who have got quite a bit of background in the area of behavioural science, and there's some of you that are new to this. It also gave us some insights into things that you've done that maybe have worked really well, but also things that maybe haven't worked so well. So thank you very much for being open and sharing those things. You highlighted a number of things around some of the challenges that you are facing in terms of animal welfare. So things such as engaging people and encouraging active participation in preventative care and preventative medicine, for example. But also things around acquisition of animals, for example. So actually how people are acquiring animals. So some of the sort of key sort of headline topics are coming out from animal welfare at this moment in time. A few things that were highlighted around the human were around how to engage with people who may appear to be resistant or may appear to lack motivation. So we're going to touch on some of these areas, but also some other elements as we go through the talk. So why would we bother? Why would we undertake looking at the human element? Why do we want to consider this? It's because if we understand why humans do the things they do and what drives them to change, we'll be more effective at making the world a better place for people, animals, and the planet. And this is something at the heart of what we do. So it's something that's core to our value system at Human Behaviour Change for Life. And we believe that these things are interconnected. So I'm going to now hand over to Sophie. We're going to be doing a bit of a tag team, and hopefully I won't fall off the stage at any point.
So when we're thinking and seeking to change the behaviour of others, it's often really helpful to reflect on our own behaviour. So it's about time to get thinking. So I'm going to really ask you guys to have a little think, just in your head for the time being. But if you've got pen and paper and you want to jot down some notes, please feel free to. So I want you to start thinking about a time when you might have tried to change a behaviour of yourself. So it could be perhaps wanting to exercise more or eat a little healthier. So just have a think about what that might have been. I'll give you a moment to do that. I'm sure you've all got something in your mind. And now have a think, did you have the knowledge to be able to do that behaviour? Did you know, for example, what exercises you had to do to reach your fitness goals? Did you know what a healthy diet might have looked like? And did you have a good reason to do it? Did you want to get fitter so you could play football with your kids, for example? And did you know the benefits? And then have a think about whether that was easy. Have you been successful and successfully changed your behaviour? Or perhaps it was still a struggle. So if it was easy, why do you think that was? And if it wasn't easy and you're still struggling, what do you think that the challenges might be? Now, I know for myself, I've definitely struggled with things around exercise and keeping up that momentum. And I know exactly how to do it, I know why I should be doing it, and yet it still is a challenge for me. And this is really a key thing that it's great to reflect on, because we can have all that knowledge and we can know the benefits and we can have a really great reason for doing these, changing these behaviours, and yet it is still a challenge. And yet when we're advocating for animal welfare with clients or with communities, we often lean into providing knowledge. We believe that if we give enough information and if we explain the benefits and the reasons why we should be changing that behaviour, then that will inevitably change the behaviour, and we can often become frustrated when it doesn't. So it's really useful to reflect that these elements aren't always enough. Knowledge is not always enough in order to change the behaviour. And so if knowledge isn't enough, there must be other factors at play, and that's really key, and that's what we can use human behaviour change science to discover. And if some of you have been to some of our events before, you might have taken part in this activity. And so we just wanted to let you know that the reason why we like to do this with our attendees is because it really helps create that connection between yourself and those that you're working with. It really helps that reflection to solidify that connection. And so at Human Behaviour Change for Life, we've developed a framework in order to help support the behaviour change process. And throughout this presentation, we're going to be talking you through this framework and this process, giving you some top tips and tools that you can take away and use to leverage human behaviour change science, whether it's in a project, a campaign, a program, or even just a conversation. So we're going through it in detail, but in essence, first of all, we really need to understand the situation in which our problem exists. We need to unpack that problem, understand what behaviours are happening or what behaviours are not happening and why that might be. We also need to unpack a messy situation that it might be involved in. The world is full of messy situations at the moment, and so it really helps to have behavioural, evidence-based frameworks, models and theories in order to help unpack that. And then we can build upon that understanding and use evidence-based interventions to help deliver and drive change. And so we'll be looking at that in a little bit more detail too. And then throughout the process, it's really important that we think about the impact. We need to know how we're doing and whether ultimately we're delivering the impact to benefit animal welfare. Throughout the process, we take a research and development approach, so we test, we learn from each stage, we feed back into our understanding, test again, and innovate as we go along. And finally, co-creation is something that is really important to Human Behaviour Change for Life. It's about involving people throughout the process, and where possible, co-creating with those that you're working with and those that you are hoping are going to be involved in that change.
So you have to walk across the stage. So, when we're looking at understanding, we need to ask the right questions. So it's actually exploring the situation that's in front of us. So some of you will be aware of the parable of the elephant. So there were 6 blind men who wanted to know what an elephant was like. One approached the trunk and felt the trunk and thought, this is like a snake. It's sort of moving around, it's wiggling. Another approached the leg and was feeling and felt, this is really strong, this is like a tree trunk. And so the parable goes on. The point of this is that if we only look at what's in front of us, we only get part of the picture. So by asking the right questions and really seeking and being inquisitive, we can start to explore what's going on. We can start to build that bigger picture. And we humans, by nature, how we've evolved to take mental shortcuts, to use heuristics in our decision making. So we base a lot of things on past experience. But we need to test those assumptions So when we're looking to really understand, we need to check in with our assumptions and really pull them apart, ask questions. So we need to have that kind of anthropological approach. So being inquisitive. We might have our own perspective or our own perception of what's happening with a situation, but actually by starting to ask the right questions and testing those assumptions and taking that anthropological approach, trying to understand it from the person in front of us perspective, we can really start to build that picture. And as Sophie's already highlighted, we're living in messy times, we're living in very complex times. So utilising systems thinking can be very, very powerful in terms of actually building the picture of what's going on, starting to look at the emergent properties, starting to think about how we can best use our resources to have that impact. And there's a lot of evidence if you look at things like human health, for example, and how it's also been translated across into animal health and welfare, such as areas such as obesity and the obesogenic environment, that have effectively used systems thinking. So this is a very powerful tool for us to explore what's going on and understand a situation. So we're now going to sort of just explore a bit more about the breadth and depth of human behaviour change.
So human behaviour change, move that up a little bit. Human behaviour change encompasses a vast number of disciplines and areas of study. And that is something that is really exciting about this subject. It's exciting because we have so much breadth and depth that we can pull upon in order to create these human behaviour change projects and campaigns, etc. So this ranges from social science studies, psychology, sociology, anthropology, etc. Also looking at things around communications and marketing, innovation, behavioural economics, and much, much more. But what's brilliant is that we can take all of these areas of study, we can take the learnings from these disciplines and look through different lenses. We can look at them through the lens of a campaign or a project or a program, but also not forgetting that we can actually look through them just through a lens as if it's a conversation. Each conversation we have can pull upon these various disciplines and really enhance that conversation through that.
So with this next slide, I'm just going to pose a few questions to you, and we might just need roaming mic people, thank you. So just have a think about these questions. So have people tried to make you change? What has worked, what hasn't, and how did you feel? So we just asked for a show of hands of people who've had someone try to make them change and they feel like it worked. So if you feel like you've got someone up there's a few people, would you be willing, anyone willing to share with us if someone had made you change, maybe a hand up, if someone was willing to just share how that person made you change and how it made you feel in terms of if it worked? I noticed there was a few hands up. Okay, so we've got one at the back. Thank you. So how did they make you change and how did it make you feel?
Well, my daughter was keen for me to do some more classes at the gym. So she signed me up for it, she gave me a printout, and then she'd say, when you go to the gym tomorrow, how are you going to feel? So, yeah, it was quite easy, really.
All right, so your daughter kind of was the cue for you.
She's studying sports science, so she's very motivating.
So she's your motivator.
Yeah.
That's fantastic. Thank you very much for sharing. And anyone in the audience, maybe if you put your hands up, if people have tried to make you change and you feel that it was more challenging. So what hasn't worked for you when someone's kind of encouraged you to change or told you to change? So maybe have a show of hands of people who feel that someone's made them try to change and it hasn't worked. Okay. So there's a lot of people abstaining. So you're on neutral, are you? So with the people who where it hasn't worked, is there someone who's willing, maybe pop your hand up, who's willing to share that experience? So there's one in the middle there. Thank you. So maybe we need to caffeinate the rest of you.
I've had loads of different people trying to make me lose weight, mainly men, and it just made me really, really cross. I have been marched down to the gym and made to do stuff, so now I am never, ever going in a gym ever again. And I find it rude and insulting and not helpful. So thus I am not thin.
Yeah. So it's that kind of, it's been quite triggering, it sounds, in terms of being told what to do. And I think this is one of the things, again, when you're reflecting on the approach you're taking, is also to reflect on how you feel yourself when someone approaches you and tries to get you to change. Is it a positive thing? Is it a negative thing? How did they approach it? Because it can be quite triggering, and I can think of plenty of examples where people have sort of triggered me because they told me to do something. But if someone's maybe taken a more inquisitive mind, more of a supportive mind, and found out a bit about me, I'm like, oh, you're interested in me, rather than actually someone just wagging a finger at me and telling me what to do. So it's that kind of, the role of how we feel emotionally is really important to take into account. So we're now going to just show a little film. Sophie's going to tell you a bit about it.
So, I feel like I'm doing synchronised dance, DJ.
I know.
So we have a short video by Dr. Mark Kennedy, who is the Senior Scientific Manager for Equines at the RSPCA. And we've been working with Mark and RSPCA alongside the University of Bristol and the University College Dublin on a project that's looking at equine welfare in the wider sector. And it's been a really fascinating project, and it's a great example of that understand phase. We've been delving into the literature, and we've also been engaging with stakeholders from across the sector, from individuals like vets and farriers, all the way to organisations working in the sector and various community groups. It's also a really brilliant example of looking at a system and unpacking that messy system using evidence-based models and frameworks. So I'm going to hand over to Mark to tell you a little bit more.
Hello, I'm Dr. Mark Kennedy and I'm Senior Scientific Manager for Equines at the RSPCA. We are working with Human Behaviour Change for Life to identify and prioritise the key drivers of the equine crisis cycle, which simply put is the observation that there are more horses bred than have good homes to go to, resulting in horses falling into situations of abandonment, neglect and suffering. We felt it was really important to have a high degree of confidence that we have actually identified the true drivers of this equine crisis cycle, as we call it, so that we can then take that information and then again working with Human Behaviour Change for Life to develop an engagement programme to allow us to address these key drivers at source, along with a monitoring and evaluation framework which will allow us to see how effective our interventions are at driving the sort of human behaviour change that's required to address this cycle of overproduction of horses and get us to a situation where we don't have so many horses falling into situations of neglect and suffering.
So a big thank you again to Mark for providing that really great summary of this project. So now we've spoken a little bit about how we can unpack these problems, explore behaviours and how we might address them, and to explore those messy systems and untangle them. And now we can move into looking at the change part of the process.
So I've just demonstrated a bit of change. So I've moved over here because I thought I'm going to get fit walking backwards and forwards. So I've just done a little bit of behaviour change on myself. We wanted to introduce a model that some of you will be familiar with. It's the Stages of Change model, also known as the trans-theoretical model. It comes from health science, particularly human health in relation to addiction. But we find that this model really resonates with people from a perspective of seeing where someone might be in that process of change. So it starts to kind of open up that it's not just a simple thing of one day a person is doing certain behaviours, the next day they're doing another, is that they go through a process of change. And when we're running projects, this is a really useful tool to start kind of breaking things down and thinking about how we develop and design interventions that fit with where someone might be in that process of change. So effectively, we've got 5 stages. We've got pre-contemplation, contemplation, planning or preparation, action, and maintenance. And you'll see where it kind of fits in with the health science around the fact that a person can relapse at any point, so they can go back. But this is something that we also recognise in our own behaviour change. So when we're starting to try and do something differently, we quite often will relapse. We think we're going to do that exercise, and then we don't. So it's thinking about kind of how we can utilise that. We can use that both from a point of view of the understanding phase, but we can also utilise it when we're developing interventions for change. So, for example, if we're looking at something from the animal welfare perspective, we might take dental care or oral hygiene with our pet animals. A person in pre-contemplation is a person who may not be aware or may not have the knowledge that actually taking care of their dog's teeth is important. So it's then thinking about what is the most effective intervention and support that that person might need in terms of kind of starting that awareness drive. The person in contemplation, something may have happened just to cause that moment of reflection. So it might be that they've seen something on the television, they've talked to a friend, they might smell that their dog's breath isn't smelling quite so savoury anymore. Something's made them reflect on the situation. So with that, it's about kind of how we can support that reflection and encourage it to move forwards. With preparation and planning, this is a person who's starting to think about what they can do. They're seeking out information. So in that situation, it might be that they've contacted the vet, they've gone online, lovely online, they've looked at social media and found out all of the answers to everything. They're starting to really seek out information that might support them, might help them. With action, that's the stage where they're actually starting to do the behaviours. They're starting to do things. So it might be they're physically going to the vet. They've got the toothbrush and the toothpaste. They've got dental chews. They're doing something to take action. The key element here is about how we maintain these behaviours, how we continue to do them in the future and don't drop off and it no longer continue. There's lots of behaviour change techniques, evidence-based behaviour change techniques that can support this. So right from supporting people through the planning and preparation stage and how to develop an effective plan that will work for them, so lots of co-creation there, through to considering whether they have the right things in place to actually take the action. And we'll come back to maintenance in a moment when we talk a little bit about habit. But we just wanted to take an opportunity just to spend just a couple of minutes talking to someone near you. So maybe talk to someone you don't normally talk to who's in front of you or to the side of you, and just have a explore how you think this might be useful in your daily practice, in the work that you're doing. I know that there's a kind of very mixed audience here. So we've got vets, vet practitioners, we've also got NGOs, charities, policymakers, we've got a whole host of different people. So how could this be relevant in your particular context and how you could use it? So just give you a couple of minutes just to get to know the person next to you, if you don't know them already, or the person in front of you, and off you go. This is like a little sort of moment. Just give you a 30-second warning. My microphone just died a bit there. Just a 30-second warning. Even tell fellow. 30 seconds.
Maybe start rounding up the conversations.
Okay, start to round up those conversations.
Goodness me.
And we're back in the room. Back in the room. So you can draw your conclusions. Thank you very much. You can tell that in the past I used to do things where I had to shout a lot, so sorry about the loud shouting. Now I'm going to ask for a volunteer or two to just share some reflections. So back to the lovely roaming mics. So maybe if anyone's willing to share a few reflections about their thoughts on this model and where it might be applicable to them. So you've got this lady in the middle there. Thank you.
So I was talking about the fact that this is something that we use already. So I work for a pet nutrition company, and we use this in relation to clients and their readiness to change what they might be doing with their animal's nutrition. So it's that thing of, the first time someone says that your dog's overweight, no, he's fine, he's just cuddly. The second time, oh, okay, that's the second time someone said it, and they're starting to move through the model. And actually, what you're trying to do is work with them to get them through into the sort of preparation and action stage, and then long term it will be maintenance. But if you try and force that client through that journey that they're not ready to take yet, they're just going to absolutely lock in at pre-contemplation, and you'll never get them anywhere. And sometimes it's about accepting that actually if you kind of plant that seed and it doesn't grow, the second person that comes along and tries to sow the seed again, oh, hang on, that's the second person. And sometimes you just need that time for the person to kind of get their head round that's where we are, to try and move them into that kind of preparation and acceptance stage. But it's a really valuable way of people not getting disheartened that they're not getting the change instantly. It's a bit like someone saying to me, you need to go to the gym. If I don't instantly go, they're going to feel like they've failed. Whereas actually if it gets to the point where actually they can get me to the gym maybe in a couple of weeks' time, actually I just needed the time to work through that myself, and it's helping people understand that that's just part of the process, it's not a failure.
Yeah, I love that. And so you're using it in action already, and that kind of supporting people and planting the seeds of change, and actually people can see kind of how they can move forward. So I suppose both from the point of view of the person who's going through the change, but also the person who's supporting the change. So yeah, that's fantastic. Maybe, is there one more? Anyone else want to? In the middle here. Oh, there's one coming from, that's it.
Hello. For context, I'm a cat behaviourist at a charity, Cats Protection, and we're always trying to think of different ways in which we can reach people to help them understand more about cat behaviour and helping their own cats. And one of the things I'm really keen to do, and we've discussed this before, is this idea of like a village or a town concept of trying, which I'm sure is like, your bread and butter, but it's more challenging for us to think about all the different people that an owner might have contact with and influence those people, because they don't necessarily come to us. They will obviously go online and Google, etc. And one of the particular different people I'd like to reach out to is hairdressers, which isn't the sort of thing that people necessarily think of straight away. And I'm just putting this out there as an idea for everyone in the room. But if you go to hairdressers, especially if you're a lady and you're there for a long time, often people are talking about obviously the weather and holidays, but also their pets. And so what I would like to do is get all the hairdressers together and just train them, vet check, behaviourists, and here's a leaflet, because that's at least a good starting point, and just get them into the conversation, because people do listen, and they listen to sort of, I don't want to say sort of peers, but that sort of thing, more so sometimes than professionals and experts. So And I'd like to point out on a very personal note, this is the one thing that my nan managed to do, and this is why I've got so much faith in it. She didn't listen to anything I ever said. And I'm sure a lot of you will be familiar with this, your own families and friends never listen. But the one thing she took on board, which was amazing given her age, is in her 90s, is microchip cat flaps. And so she was down the hairdressers every 6 weeks, as she used to do, and someone else mentioned to her hairdresser that she was having a problem with her cat coming in through the cat flap. And my nan pipes up and says, you need a microchip cat flap. And because these people were clearly coming every 6 weeks together, she saw that person again, and they did actually do it. So I'm like, right, hairdresser's the way forwards.
So you've got lots in what you've just described. So you've got kind of the person moving from pre-contemplation to contemplation in terms of the information at the hairdressers. I love this opportunity. The modelling of the behaviours, and also that kind of whole thing about the maintaining and moving through those stages. So thank you very much for sharing that. So lots and lots there. So thank you all for engaging with that. We've got another model here that we think is always useful just to kind of take into account during conversations and dealing with difficult challenges sometimes in terms of those opportunities for change and how people may be feeling as they're going through the process of change. So in terms of the transition curve, what we have here is it outlines some of the emotions, some of the feelings that may come up as someone is going through the process of change. So you're thinking about kind of your own situation where someone, you want to change something, you may feel quite anxious, you think, God, I need to do something about this. But actually, when someone starts to present a solution, it can lift the situation. It can almost be that sense of happiness. Something is going to happen soon. And if you think, from a point of view of people's concerns over their animals, it can generate quite a lot of stress if they feel like there's something wrong with their animal, but they don't really know how to approach it. But also thinking about as they go through that process and maybe they've brought their animal to the vet, for example, it's not necessarily always going to go to plan. You may have situations where people exhibiting signs that they've gone into denial, there's pushback, they don't want to admit that there's a need to change. But there may also be other things like fear. They may feel guilty that they haven't taken action. They may feel angry in terms of the things that are being suggested. So it's thinking about kind of what's happening in front of you and what sort of emotions you may be sort of dealing with. But as we travel through this curve, people can come out the other side and start to move forwards in a positive way. It's worth mentioning that it doesn't happen that everyone's going to go through every single stage. But what this model does is it's a good reminder just to think about, okay, where is someone at in this process? And how can I deal with the person in front of me? What is the story behind that person in front of me that might actually explain why they're feeling and they're reacting in the way that they are? So it's quite a useful tool just to check in with. So we now have another case example.
Yes, so this time we have a short video from a really great friend of HBCL, Tamsin Thurston, who is the Veterinary Engagement Manager at Dogs Trust. And Tamsin's going to go through an example of how she has applied a behaviour change model in a really practical, real-life example. And what I really love about this example is exactly that, how practical it is. And, we can talk about these theories and these models and frameworks, but they're only as good as they are in action. And that's something that is very core to what we do at HBCL. We're all about turning theory into practice. And so really grateful to Tamsin for sharing this really fantastic example. So I'm going to hand over to Tamsin.
Hello, my name's Tamsin Thurston. I'm a registered veterinary nurse and a clinical animal behaviourist, currently working with Dogs Trust, but I've previously worked as nurse manager at Blue Cross Animal Welfare Hospital, and I am going to share how I used Bandura 1977, nearly as old as me, self-efficacy theory to help me really build self-belief and self-confidence across the nursing team in that hospital. And when I had new staff joining our team, I realised that What we know about imposter syndrome tells us that when you start somewhere new, when you start something new, you're likely to experience self-doubt. So I use this theory to design an induction process where if you started as a new nurse, you would spend, there are so many duties, first of all, when you're a veterinary nurse. You might be in the laboratory, you might be in nurse clinic, you might be monitoring anaesthetics, you might be nursing on the surgical ward, you might be nursing medical patients, you might be performing radiography, all of these different tasks. So what I decided to do was, as a new nurse, you would spend 1 week with somebody else, another nurse, mentoring you within that one specific role, and then you would spend a second week on the same duty but by yourself without that mentor. Then you would move around the rotas, and then over a period of sort of 16 weeks you had travelled around the 8 different duties within the hospital, 1 week being mentored by someone, and that could even be one of our student nurses, and then having a week by yourself. So during that time, you'll have experienced Bandura's theory of how to build self-belief. And that's by having performance accomplishments where you take on tasks and you achieve them, where you are given feedback. And this is feedback by someone that you know and that you trust because you identify with them. And from my perspective, being mentored and actually shadowing different people on each of these duties meant that you actually got to know everyone in the whole team and you realised that you could learn from everyone. I have a real mantra about remembering who is the teacher in front of me, what has this person got to teach me, whether they're a student and I might have a qualification that they don't, but when I start working in this new place, they know more than me. And so that's really important that everybody gets the chance to learn from everybody else because you build respect across the team. You also see people, you have vicarious experiences where you see people that you identify with excelling in tasks, and that gives you the belief that you can do it too. And then because of that camaraderie and because you're building up relationships with many people across the team, you're developing this positive emotional feeling as well, which connects you to it. And those are the 4 areas of Bandura's self-efficacy theory, that you have these performance accomplishments, you see people who you identify with achieving what you want to achieve, you then get feedback from people that you trust, and then you have a positive emotional connection to what you're doing. And that's a lovely piece of human behavioural insight that we applied in our hospital. And I had really connected, self-confident nurses ready to then work and take responsibility for their own duties. And that really worked for us. So just hoping that makes sense to you and is something that you could apply as well.
Another big thank you to Tamsin for that, and it's such an amazing amount of rich information and examples in that. And I really like how it's an example of an internal process and practically applied internally. From the survey that we put out, there were quite a few people that responded about challenges perhaps in teams or how to motivate teams, so it's a really nice example of that. So thank you again to Tamsin. And so we have a few of our favourite resources that we wanted to introduce to you. On the left, we have the ABC of Behaviour Change Theories, which outlines 83 different models, frameworks and theories, which is a really fantastic resource and just highlights the breadth of this subject area. And it's great because you can pick and choose the models that might match your aim and what you would like to use them for. And then on the right, we have the Behaviour Change Wheel and Combi model. Now, some of you might be familiar with this, you might even be using it, but we feel like for those of you who have not, and even for those of you who have, it's always good to have a little refresher. But it's one of our favourite frameworks and models because it really takes you through that whole process of change, right from the understanding and identifying the behaviours that you want to change in the COM part of the Combi model at the beginning, in the middle circle there, all the way through to choosing the right intervention for that behaviour change, and then how those fit in the wider policy landscape. So I'm not going to go over them in a huge amount of detail, but we really encourage you to explore this in your own time if you haven't, because they really are fantastic resources. But in the middle there, in the green section, we have the COM part of the model. So that's capability, opportunity, and motivation. And capability is split between psychological and physical capability, psychological being, as we touched upon earlier, sort of imparting that knowledge, giving information, providing education, whereas the physical is about skills. Do the people you're working with have the skills that they need to be able to participate in the behaviour that you're seeking? Opportunity is around social, but also physical. So the social element is who is around you, your social network, the social element of society that your behaviour sits within. And then physical is about resources. Does the person trying to change behaviour have the physical resources they need? That might be equipment, but it could also be time, it could be financial resources. And then motivation is automatic or reflective. So is it a behaviour that is automatic and you don't need to really think about, or is it a reflective motivation where maybe it's something new that you have to expend more energy, both physical and mental, in order to undertake that behaviour? And the important thing is that none of these sit in isolation, none of them are more important than the other. It's really key to explore all of these different elements when trying to identify the behaviour that you're trying to change in order to solve a problem. And several people within the survey that we put out mentioned things around working with deprived communities, for example. And so in that context, you could look at it through a COM-B lens and try and use evidence-based theories and models in order to pick apart whether it's a physical or psychological capability barrier, whether there's something around opportunity, or whether it's more about motivation. So you can see how that might fit within different contexts. And so once you have a bit more of a grasp on the behaviour that you would like to change and how that fits within that COM model, we move on to the intervention phase, which is the red circle. And I won't go into this in detail, Joe will talk about this a little bit more next. And then outside of that, we have that policy landscape. So what context do these interventions, these behaviours need to sit in? What kind of support might we need to have in place in order to make them effective?
So we're now looking at the intervention options. So as Sophie's already highlighted, there are a number of intervention options, and the eagle-eyed of those who use the COM-B model and behaviour change will notice that we're missing one. It dropped off. So I will just mention that one. It's fallen off the slide. So there's varying different options that we can utilise in terms of developing interventions. And how the COM-B model works is it allows us to map these across onto intervention functions. So we can make sure that we've got the best intervention approach that we can in terms of the particular situation. So it covers everything from education, so thinking about knowledge and understanding, training. As Sophie highlighted, we feel it's one of the things that we come up quite often with is that actually training is one of the sort of critical areas. There's a lot of talk about knowledge provision and education, but sometimes training falls off the radar in terms of actually whether people can do the behaviours. So you're thinking about kind of just simple things like how people might handle an animal, how they might give them certain medication, how they might approach different animals in different contexts in terms of their general management. Do they have the skills? Do they need further support in developing those skills to be actually able to do these behaviours? There's other areas such as persuasion, so thinking about how we can encourage the behaviours to occur, how we can support people in terms of setting up the right cues for them to do the behaviour. As Tamsin highlighted, modelling, that's a really good example, both from a point of view of the right person modelling the behaviour. So it might be someone, it might be the vet modelling the behaviour, someone is looking to for their expertise, but it also might be someone in their social group, in their community, that's the right person to model the behaviour. But going back to the training element, there's also seeing someone else doing the activity. So seeing someone give a cat a pill before they start to actually try and do it themselves. So they know what's involved, they know how to do it, but they can also start to model that behaviour. Incentivization, so how do we make this a positive thing to keep doing the behaviours? And this can be, obviously there's a lot of talk in the world about monetary incentivization, but it can also be things around emotion and feeling. So does a person get a good feedback from what they're doing? Punishment, it's the same sort of principle in the sense that you could also look at it from the point of view of feedback, but also thinking about areas around legislation and laws being in place around things like animal welfare. Restrictions, how we might restrict certain behaviours from occurring, and then we have environmental restructuring. So we've got, this provides a real opportunity that's quite often underutilised, but it's in everything we do. So if you think about moving around, just taking your car out for a drive, there's a whole environment that is actually structured to get us to do certain behaviours. The traffic, furniture, the lines on the road, it's all set up to get us to do certain behaviours. And there's some really exciting, innovative approaches that have been taken. So from everything from burping bins to encourage you to put your rubbish in a bin, through to things like the work that people like Temple Grandin have done to try and reduce the issues around human-animal interaction and actually causing animal stress. So there's lots of opportunity there in terms of environmental restructuring. The one that's missing is enablement. So enabling people to be actually able to do the behaviours, supporting them and making sure the right things are in place. Throughout this is communication. We're social animals, so we like to communicate. So it's thinking about how we can develop our conversations so we can actively improve and empower change. So we talk about conversations for change. And a few little sort of tips that can be really helpful. So I mentioned at the beginning about shared values. This is a really useful approach from a point of view of taking values-based communications approaches. So thinking about where you sit in terms of your own value system, but also the person you're communicating. Is there common ground in terms of that values base? What do they care about? What do you care about? It doesn't necessarily have to be about animal welfare to start the conversation, because first of all, we need to engage that person. So in certain situations where we might be dealing with quite tricky situations, and thinking back, I've done quite a lot of work on the issue of animals transported to slaughter, for example. And if you can seek out where those shared values are and start that conversation, it might just be talking about someone's family, your family, just finding the common ground. We can start to build that rapport with them, and then we can start to look at kind of exploring some of the trickier subject areas. It's a tool that can be used within our network, so linking people to the right information and the right support. Another thing to take into account is we do have lots of biases, and it's remembering that when we're having these conversations, when we're approaching things. We all have them, and it's just checking in with them. So one example is confirmation bias. So I might see a U, you might see an N, and I'm going, it's you, come on. And you're just thinking, this woman's mad, what's she talking about? And it's just thinking about, I will look for things that support my belief system. So again, this is something that we've evolved. We've used mental heuristics, shortcuts, to help us in relation to sort of dealing with day-to-day life. So our belief systems are developed at quite a young age. They can change, and they do change, but we need to think about how we're communicating the information that we're putting across. So we're trying to introduce new information, new concepts, it can be something that's discarded because it doesn't fit with someone's belief system. But if we can do the same thing of thinking about where the common ground is and actually introduce that new information in a way that actually connects with that person, rather than thinking, I'm just going to give them the facts, which they may just chuck out because it doesn't fit with their belief system. If you start to look at that alignment, you can actually start to have that conversation more effectively. So on to another little tip.
So we just really wanted to emphasize the importance and the power of truly involving people and empowering people to have ownership over the change. And this is summarized really nicely in a couple of quotes that we've pulled out for you. The first one being, tell me and I forget, show me and I remember, involve me and I truly understand. Now, some of you might have heard this Chinese proverb before, you might be familiar with the sentiment, and that's fantastic. But what we really want you to do, and what we need to all do in our lives, is to really live that sentiment. So just want to invite you to think about next time you lean into maybe the teacher mode and you're about to give someone some information, or you're about to give them some knowledge about whatever you're talking about. Just have a quick pause and think, is there a way that I can show them? Or even better, is there a way that I can actually involve them in this? And so I think that's a really useful sort of thing to have in the back of your mind, just to have that moment of pause and think, is there another way? And really empower those people to be involved in that change. Secondly, we have a quote by Barack Obama who says, I'm asking you to believe not in my ability to change, but in yours. And I think that's also really key. It's not about whether the person we're working with trusts us to be able to help them to change, but it's about them having that confidence that they are able to make that change.
Now I'm going to talk about one of, I suppose, our pet subjects in terms of habit formation. And this links back to what we were talking about with maintenance and looking at how we can start to develop behaviours that can be maintained. So we feel that habit has enormous potential in animal welfare for really delivering some significant positive change. And that's because once formed, habits are stronger than intention. So you might have an intention to do that, to do a particular activity, but if you've got another habit that's kicking in and is going to persuade you to do something else, you're going to do the habitual behaviour. A study found that habits take root in children by the age of 9, so we're starting to do these habits very early. And actually, again, it shows that there's an opportunity there from a point of view of supporting children to develop positive habits. As mentioned about the opportunity in animal welfare, so much of what we do in terms of routine care and management of animals is done in repetition, in terms of providing food and water, the right sort of living environments, enrichment, handling. These are sorts of things that we do routinely, and that's ripe for creating habits. Habits grow in an environment where we have repetition, where we have the same sort of environment, we have the same contextual cues. So it's really ripe for actually developing habits. On the diagram, so Charles Duhigg, so people who are kind of into habits will know all about Charles Duhigg, developed this habit loop. It will also be familiar for those who work in terms of the behavioural side. And effectively what we're looking at is we have a cue to do the behaviour, we do the behaviour, and then we get a reward for doing it. So that might be an emotional reward, that might be a physical reward. And we create that craving. But by thinking and using this loop, we can start to think about how we create our own habits. I use habits a lot, but we can also help support people to develop plans. And the plan at the top, very simple kind of guide, is something that was developed by B.J. Fogg. So he looked at developing tiny habits. So the idea being that by connecting lots of habits, so taking an existing habit you already have, so it might be cleaning your teeth, for example, you can connect another habit to it, a new habit that you want to form. So it means that we can have lots of behaviours developing and actually cementing and becoming really, really strong. So what it does in essence, we have, when I do my existing behaviour, my existing habit, I will do the next one, the thing I want to create, and I'll get that reward back. So with the example we've got here, I drink a lot of caffeine, so when I put the kettle on in the morning, I will give the dog his medication, so that's kind of getting me to do that new habit I want to form, so that I maintain a healthy dog, and I'm feeling good about myself because I've done the right thing by my animal. And this is a very simple tool that we can use with people to develop behaviours. I'm aware that we wanted to do a little activity with you, so we're a bit short of time, but this is one that's worth thinking about in terms of it can be used in lots of different contexts. So as we move towards the final stages of our presentation, we're going to talk about impact.
Yes, so we've gone through how to unpack the problem in the understand phase and how to then use evidence-based interventions in the change phase. And so now we're going to talk about impact, which, although it may look like it's on the end of the line, it's actually important to address impact right from the very beginning of that understand phase and introduce baseline measures for monitoring and evaluation. So it's really key that when we're doing a behaviour change project, that we know how it's going. We need to know what are the indicators that are going to tell us that what we're doing is heading us towards that impact that we're trying to achieve. And so you can think of it a little bit like a car dashboard. There's lots of lights, there's lots of dials, and luckily we don't need to know what all of these things do. But what we do need to know is if there's a big red flashing light that tells us that we're in trouble, or that something, that tells us that we're in trouble. So we need to understand what's on our dashboard for our project. But more importantly, when we're working with others, it's really key to work with them to understand what would be on their dashboard. What are the things that are going to be key for that person in order for them to understand whether they are, how they're doing, whether they're making the successes to head them in the right direction. And so we can do that by involving the client or the community or the group that we're working with. That's that co-creation approach. It's talking to them, really understanding what is going to be that measure for them that makes sense and will help them get towards the end goal. And in doing so, we can even then celebrate those successes, which is really important to keep up that momentum and really solidify the change that we're doing. And so you can think of it, perhaps an example you could think of is if you are trying to address obesity in a dog, that you might work with the client to set up a self-monitoring journal, for example, which is a really useful tool and technique that they can use to write down, for example, how many treats they're giving their dog or how many times they're able to walk it. And then they can set targets and then celebrate that success. So that's a really fantastic evidence-based approach for monitoring and evaluation. So as we draw to the end of our talk, we just wanted to leave you with some take-home messages. So understand first. I can't stress how important that understand phase is. Really unpack the problem, really understand those behaviours that you're trying to solve. And don't make assumptions when you're in that phase. Don't assume that you know what is going to be the behaviour that you're trying to address or what the barrier or the driver might be. Look beyond the knowledge provision, although that is important in many cases. Look beyond that to see what other factors might be involved. Truly involve people. Use co-creation as much as possible. Really empower those that you're working with or those that are involved in the change to take ownership of that change process. And take a systems approach. So by looking at a problem or a situation in the systems lens, you can really identify the factors that are going to be most important in addressing that change. Address the causes, not the symptoms, and embrace the complexities. Behaviour is complex, behaviour change is complex, but with the right theories, models and frameworks that are evidence-based and those interventions, we can unpack those and make real, lasting, sustainable change. And you're going to apply human behaviour change a little or a lot. And I think that's really important to note, because it can be easy to fall into the trap of thinking of it in terms of a whole project or a whole campaign, but actually you can apply it in your day-to-day lives with the way you work with your colleagues, with the way that you have conversations with your family and friends and the clients that you work with. And there's so much more to learn. This is just a real taster, and we really hope that it's sparked an excitement that you can go away and take that home and explore this subject area more.
So just to say a big thank you for listening, and please do get in touch with us. We'd love to hear about your work. We have a regular newsletter, so if you do have any work that you're doing in behaviour change, please do share it with us, because other people will also like to hear what you're up to. We do varying different activities, from consultancy and supporting organisations to offering training. We love a bit of a messy problem and looking at how we can unpack it. So if anyone wants to sort of chat about messy problems in terms of kind of finding solutions, we'd love to delve into that sort of thing. Here's some examples of some of the organisations that we've worked with. There's some other people and organisations in the room that we've also worked with. But just to give you a flavour, that our heartland is still in animal welfare, but we're doing increasing amounts of work outside as well, which is very much kind of, it's really useful from a point of view of the interconnected nature. So areas of environment conservation, regenerative farming, human well-being, so all areas that are very much connected to animal welfare as well. So just a few examples of those organisations. So thank you ever so much for engaging with our talk. That's our website. As I said, the newsletter has lots of links on it, so it's the sort of thing that we have lots of information, the latest stuff that's coming out on behaviour change, then please do get in touch with us. So thank you very much.
Hello. Oh, it's working. Thank you. Thank you both very much indeed. An excellent delve into a hugely complex, but having said it, amazingly useful topic that we really need to know more about, as I remember how I carefully and casually insulted clients all the way through my practice life. So we've got time for a few questions. So roving mics at the ready. Can we have some questions for these two, please? Fiona?
Thanks, Julian, and thanks for an excellent discussion this morning. I just wanted to ask about the situation when you have people who don't believe evidence and who aren't motivated by evidence. We're all quite evidence-based people, I think, probably in the room, and I often come across situations where emotion's very important. Could you just perhaps explain how you approach a situation like that, please? Thank you.
Thank you very much for that question. Can you all hear me okay? So yeah, this is where we were sort of talking about things like values-based communication. So we are emotional animals generally, and obviously, you know, I'm aware of the audience here that you've got a very strong scientific background, but not everybody receives that information in the same way. So it's about kind of, first of all, looking at that engagement technique. So from a point of view of looking where there's shared values can be enormously impactful. So where that person, what the things that they care about. So starting through that engagement process and understanding they may not want the detail. They may not want the sort of scientific evidence. It's maybe more about talking to them at the level they want to be talked about, from the sort of emotional feelings that they're having. So actually tapping into that can be very powerful, and understanding that maybe they don't want the detail, but they just want that support from a point of view of emotion. But taking the time to have that values-based, use values-based communications can be really, really impactful with that. Thank you.
Thank you for your excellent insight into how to change human behaviour. However, I'm having trouble seeing how this individual change can affect changes at a social level. I suspect some of our problem is that we don't all agree on what is good animal welfare. And I would go into your question about the dental change, where I suspect that if you push that one to its limits, it could be very regular visits to the vet and lots of unnecessary dental treatment. But that aside, how do we change to make people stop breeding flat-faced dogs that can't breed?
I think this is one of the points where we talk about kind of understanding the sort of messy situation, in the sense that people will be at different points and will have different belief systems. So it's by looking at kind of what is driving that and where that's coming from that we start to build up the picture. And I think sometimes we focus very much on kind of the hardest to reach people, first of all, rather than the ones who are sort of lower hanging fruit. And thinking about, you know, with the fact that we are social animals, that we are influenced by each other, if we can actually start to sort of tap into people who maybe aren't quite there yet, but are actually showing the signs. So they're making the noises about change, but they're not necessarily there yet. If we can kind of work with those that are much easier, an easier group to work with to start off with, that can actually start to create the momentum for change in terms of that kind of social influence. We're always going to have situations where there are people with different views, and I think it's being open to the fact that we need to listen, we need to kind of find out what is driving that view, and this is why this is why we emphasise the understand part of what we're talking about so much, because it's really getting in amongst what is driving that, and then working effectively with the nuances, because it's not going to be a one-size-fits-all for a society. It's going to be about kind of how you work with different groups in different ways. So I don't know if that sort of helps. And I don't know, Sophie, did you want to add anything? A bit.
No, that was great.
Any more questions, please? Right there, thank you.
Thank you for your presentation. Change obviously takes time, and sustained change takes even longer, and part of that process is building trust. There are some occasions, though, where we don't have time for certain decisions to be made. So how can those decisions be made, and how can those actions be carried out without disrupting that trust and without making individuals or groups of people feel like they're being pushed through that cycle of realization and action?
That actually segues really nicely onto the next talk, because in terms of, there's an area of, you may have come across motivational interviewing, and it's been used widely in human health and human medicine, and the approach is about kind of building that rapport, but they've honed it down so that you can actually have those conversations quite quickly. So it's about developing this sort of listening skills, developing an approach of open questions, so that it can be taken in a way that you're supporting that person. And I mentioned about things like listening for the difference between change and sustained talk. So by actually sort of developing an ear for the kind of the signals that someone's giving you about kind of how much they're talking in sustained talk, so they kind of want to hold on to their position, and how much they're starting to sort of consider things. But we could do sort of a whole week, month, year on motivational interviewing, but motivational interviewing is something that is a real technique that can help with what you're outlining.
Yeah, there's a question over there, please.
Hi, thanks for that great talk. I was just wondering if the behaviour change models need to be amended in any way for people who might be neurodivergent as opposed to neurotypical people, or would you follow the same process with these?
I think it's about how you apply it, because in the end there's so much diversity in everybody. So it's about kind of using them as a toolkit, a framework with which to make sure that we've gone through certain processes to take into account the differences in the world and differences in people. So I think that if approached in the right way, I think that they can work really well. So it's just, because it's got to apply to all the individual differences that people have, and the fact that people do change as well in that process.
Okay, thank you. If I could just, one of the things I think as welfare professionals, we're always behind the curve. We think we're now trying to deal with flat embrace trees, and suddenly we now have cropped ears appearing all over the social media. How do we get to be listened to? What do we need to do as a community to be better at getting people to stop and think before they do it?
I think this, again, is something that's quite often overlooked, is that need for reflection and what we can do to support people in those moments of reflection. Because I think we live in such a, everything's got to be done so quickly. It's kind of creating the space. And I suppose it goes back to the question about having the time, but actually, I think, again, someone mentioned in the audience earlier about planting the seeds. So it's actually planting the seeds and then giving people the opportunity to reflect, but not just leaving them to it. Support, social support is so important. And we're seeing this, I think, in society around kind of some of the issues around mental health, for example, how we can actually structure things so that we don't just leave people on their own. They've got that support network, but they've also got the time to reflect, because we all need that space just to consider what's the information that's been given. So, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Right, are there any more questions? Oh, yes, one at the top there, please.
Thank you. It's just a comment, really, moving on from what you've said. I believe I'm right in thinking that Britain still doesn't have animal welfare on the national curriculum for schools. So that might be a place to start, especially when you mentioned habits start at age 9 onwards.
It's a point that's really close to our heart. And my husband's actually a head of a primary school teacher. He's a head of a primary school, so yeah, he gets pasting about it as well. So we are actually working with a project at the moment that's looking at this area. So yes, totally agree with you. And anything that can be done to kind of push that agenda, I think, is really important.
You're saying that because I've been a STEM ambassador for years, and every time I go to them saying, "Why haven't you got welfare on the agenda?" they look at me perplexed and say, "Can you do something on physics or rockets taking off?" Which I do, but hey, that's a waste of time. I quite agree. A last question, if we may, please.
Yeah, sorry, just a quick question adding on to what Julian was saying. How does Human Behaviour Change for Life recognise the fact that there are people out there that have utilised their knowledge of human behaviour, like advertising, for example, that have goals that directly conflict with what we're trying to achieve? So just, for an example, how better animal welfare within farming could conflict with productivity, for example.
I think that's such an important point. It's this is why having talks like this, engaging with discussions like this is so important, because we need to understand the situation. Elements of human behavioural science have been used in social marketing for years and years and years. And actually, by us embracing the science and really understanding how we can use it in practice, it can help to sort of address that balance. So I think it's about kind of the sector, about all those involved in kind of working to improve animal welfare as much as possible. If we can create a culture of embracing human behavioural science, that will help to redress the balance, because it's been used in other areas for a long, long, long time. So thank you for that question.
Right, thank you very much. So it just leaves me to thank these two again for an excellent talk. Thank you both.
Thank you very much.